Hello, my name is Ueda. I'm curator of the Japanese Diaspora Collection at the Hoover Institution Library Archives and the editor of the exhibition companion book, Fanning the Flames, Propaganda in Modern Japan.
And I'm Marissa Rhee, Exhibition Curation and Design Manager here at Hoover and the exhibition team project lead for the Fanning the Flame project.
We are standing in front of Hoover Tower, an iconic building in the heart of the Stanford University campus and the home of the Hoover Institution Library Archives. The Library Archives was founded by Herbert Hoover at his alma mater, right here at Stanford University, in 1919, a decade before the U.S. National Archives was established. He was a visionary ahead of his time in collecting and documenting war-related materials. To realize his vision in our second century, we continue to collect, preserve, describe, and most importantly, make available historically valuable material about war, revolution, and peace in the world. And now, it's our great pleasure to welcome you to this virtual tour of the exhibition, Fanning the Flames, Propaganda in Modern Japan. As we enter the exhibition gallery, we are confronted by the introduction wall, which features heroic Captain Higuchi rescuing a Chinese infant from the battlefield of the First Sino-Japanese War in 1895. This is a detail taken from a woodblock print by Mizuno Toshikata. It sets the mood and the tone as we enter this new experience and begin to learn about visual propaganda in Japan, which appealed to the masses as accessible and affordable during the era of the Empire of Japan. From the vast collections at Hoover, we have chosen the Japanese popular arts because of their powerful visual messaging capabilities to offer you an opportunity to re-examine propaganda. Emerging in the mid-19th century, after a period of strict isolationism, Japan under the rule of Emperor Meiji began a series of modernization efforts that transformed the nation from a feudal state to an expansionist empire. Accompanying these changes, state-sponsored and grassroots commercial propaganda became an omnipresent influence in Japanese life. This exhibition explores how Japan catered to traditional aesthetics by employing popular arts as propaganda that created imperialist fervor. Throughout the exhibition, we'll navigate through three major wars, including the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894-95, which was the first Japanese overseas military campaign in modern times, as well as the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-05 and World War II. This first case dives into the topic of propaganda, which is a strong collecting area here at Hoover. Examples from our poster collection and children's propaganda introduce various methods employed to spread information that will influence public opinion regardless of truth. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 initiated a period of rapid assimilation of Western advancements and imperialistic interest. Artists applied traditional aesthetics and communication techniques to make uniquely Japanese media, even as Western technologies such as photography, lithography, and films became widespread. Popular formats such as Nishikiye and Kamishibai then became more than entertainment but key propaganda tools.
But what is Nishikiye? What is Kamishibai? Our next cases review these unique Japanese media, beginning with Nishikiye, literally meaning brocade pictures. They're multicolored prints made from a Japanese woodblock printing technique. This process begins when an artist creates a design that is then passed to a woodblock carver for engraving into multiple blocks, one for each color. The blocks are then turned over to a printer who adds pigment and aligns the wood blocks for printing to produce the final image that a publisher then sells. This multi-step group process could quickly produce large runs of high-quality prints relatively inexpensively for sale to the mass market. This technique gained popularity at the end of the 18th century, and by the Meiji period was in high demand. When combined with the late 19th century trend to publish current events, Nishikiye became a popular propaganda tool. Prints began to dramatize the excitement of the latest inventions, events, conflicts, and celebrities, all while promoting nationalist messaging. The fervor for collecting these artworks peaked during the First Sino-Japanese War, and works flooded the market. Yet, by the Russo-Japanese War, consumer interest declined, and few war-themed Nishikiye, like the first blockade of Port Arthur, were created afterwards. Kamishibai, which translates to paper plays, is a form of storytelling that developed in the early 1930s. It was such a popular entertainment that an op-ed published in the Asahi Shimbun in 1933 likened it to opium for children. Performed using a transportable wooden stage, the Kamishibai itself is a deck of 20 illustrated paper cards. They are illustrated on the front with the script printed on the back. As you see here, the cards would be inserted into the stage and rotated one by the Kamishibai performer, who would give a dramatic solo performance with sound effects and various voices to captivate their audience. By 1937, there were nearly 30,000 Kamishibai performers across Japan, performing to a minimum of 1 million children daily. Kamishibai had developed into various forms by this time, most notably child-focused street and educational Kamishibai. Yet, with the start of the Asia-Pacific War in China in 1937, which evolved into the Pacific Theater of World War II, wartime Kamishibai became a prolific propaganda medium targeting everyone.
As we move across the gallery, we can begin to explore how these very different mediums were used to achieve the goals of propaganda for the Empire of Japan. Hero stories were a common and popular method for delivering inspiring examples of the greatness of Japanese soldiers and encouraging the righteousness of traditional samurai values and patriotism. Here we present highlights of propaganda featuring these bushido values and hero stories. The Meiji government abolished the privileges bestowed to samurai, the top 7% of the population. But many maintained their elite status. Many generals and admirals of the First Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War were in fact former samurai. Nishikiye from this time period almost exclusively cast the spotlight on generals as great heroes, inspiring the masses.
The story of Captain Higuchi, whether completely true or embellished, epitomizes the war propaganda trope of the compassionate conqueror. It uniquely symbolized for the Japanese public the notion that not only were their nation's efforts in the war respectable, but also necessary for the saving of China's future. Such a message aligned well with Japanese bushido values.
Interestingly, bushido, literally the way of samurai, became better defined in Meiji Japan and was further propagated amongst the Japanese during World War II. Massive conscription from 1937 to 1945 revealed that Japanese military needed to tap every eligible man into service, and bushido values helped them succeed. The unwritten code of self-discipline, self-sacrifice, respect, and responsibility penetrated the minds of many, this time through both true and sensationalized hero stories.
The bombing raid of the fighter aircraft unit, published in 1939, is a heroic fiction that tells the tale of Japanese pilots and their camaraderie. In it, pilot Sawa bravely lands his plane in enemy territory and rescues downed pilot Makimoto. Paper plays depicting bushido values, like honor and responsibility as seen here, were regularly performed at schools, in military factories, and in towns and cities throughout Japan. To strengthen the connection to samurai ideals, this Kamishibai even has the hero Sawa wield a katana in one hand.
Before the 19th century, the Japanese imperial family was publicly invisible. Emperors did not travel, and their portraits did not circulate. This changed with Emperor Meiji, who was thrust into the limelight as the supreme ruler of a modernizing nation. In this case, we first see the propaganda Nishikiye of Emperor Meiji. Many depictions of the emperor, whether in paintings, prints, or photographs, did not prioritize conveying Meiji's appearance or covering events accurately. Nonetheless, Emperor Nishikiye offered consistently recurring and easily recognizable sovereign figure as a stable beacon during radically changing times.
This print by Toshu Shoketsu of Emperor Meiji and Empress Shoken visiting the 1890 Industrial Exhibition was made and sold 2 months before the exhibition opened. The practice of releasing imagery ahead of the event was typical for Nishikiye and akin to how movie trailers today spur anticipation. As was common for prints of the imperial family at the time, there are no labels identifying the people present. The visual context was enough.
By the 1930s, depictions of the emperors were limited to photographs. Emperor Hirohito was considered a living god, and illustrations of him were perceived as profane. Out of this reverence developed symbolic representations of him that were easily understood by the masses. For example, depictions of the imperial palace as seen in Kamishibai were known to stand in for the emperor.
While the emperor was not depicted in Kamishibai, many paper plays made reference to his importance. In the play 7 Stones from 1942, Kazuo wants to send a care package, known as imonbukuro, to soldiers, but his family is poor. Kazuo visits the imperial palace grounds and takes 7 stones to send as tokens of protection for soldiers in the field. A year later, the surviving 4 recipients of the stones meet Kazuo, and together they return the stones and give thanks to the unseen emperor. This story emphasizes the bravery and sacrifice of the soldiers, the emperor as a divine symbol, and the idea that anyone can contribute to the war effort.
Women were never shown in propaganda Nishikiye except when it came to the imperial family. Here, Emperor Shoken is depicted visiting the Yasukuni Shrine Memorial to war dead and wounded soldiers in hospitals, modeling the ways Japanese women could support their husbands and sons drafted for combat.
Creating meishoe, meaning pictures of famous places, was one way artists found to incorporate the women of the imperial family into Meiji-era Nishikiye while steering clear of the censors. In this print by Utagawa Hiroshige III, the title identifies the location, while a placard hidden behind a lamppost displays the kanji characters kozoku, meaning imperial family, a surreptitious clue for the viewer.
Kamishibai produced during World War II show a departure from women's relatively limited participation in prior conflicts. Every aspect of women's lives was used in the mobilization campaign. The placing of women in visible roles of patriotic service was a dramatic policy shift desperately needed by Japan as the war progressed and resources were depleted.
New roles were promoted to women through Kamishibai in order to help the war effort. In What We Are Supposed to Do from 1944, the narration speaks directly to the audience in order to rouse them to meet the demand of the war effort. Women take up roles in factories and in fire brigades putting out air raid fires, and are warned about the dangers of spreading rumors. In Neighborhood Association from 1941, a group of children find solutions to help their neighbors supporting the war effort, including asking a mother to breastfeed another's baby as that person is busy working in a munitions factory. Not even a woman's body was off limits to the propagandists.
In this next section, we look at examples of one of the oldest propaganda techniques, dehumanizing and degrading the enemy. Depictions of enemies as different could subliminally encourage disrespect and make it easier to overcome inhibitions to do them harm. This is seen in the racially derogatory and violent Nishikiye depictions of Chinese and Korean soldiers in the late 19th century. Yet enemy depictions of the Russo-Japanese War, which occurred only 1 decade later, are often respectful and show them as equal to the Japanese. In both scenes, Japan has achieved a victory, yet the Chinese generals are groveling old-fashioned-looking stereotypes. In contrast to the Chinese, the Russians wear modern uniforms and have a balanced position at the negotiation table. This difference stems from Eurocentric views at the time. Japan was eager to show themselves as the dominant, most civilized Asian nation, on par with the colonizing powers from the West, superior to their fellow Asians but equal to their Russian enemies. By World War II, Japan had moved toward more universally depicting enemies in derogatory ways, regardless of nationality, as seen in Kamishibai caricatures of Allied soldiers and their leaders.
These Kamishibai feature depictions of the enemy in rather unflattering ways. In What We Are Supposed to Do from 1944, the cover features scrawny and deformed American soldiers, while other cards feature chubby satirical caricatures of American President Roosevelt as Uncle Sam and British Prime Minister Churchill as John Bull.
Disinformation is a standard element of propaganda. In this section, we highlight arguably non-deliberate and deliberate attempts. In Meiji-era Japan, there could be seen across Nishikiye depictions of forced battle narratives that emphasize Japanese prowess. However, there were also cases of pure misinformation, inaccurate details that arose largely from the limited speed of communication, coupled with commercial demands on publishers to produce rapidly.
The First Army Advancing on Mukden, from 1894 and by Ogata Gekko, depicts a mobilization of troops to attack Mukden that never happened due to Japan and China beginning peace negotiations. Like most woodblock print artists, Gekko remained at home in Japan and likely based his work on written reports, photographs, or imagination. Unsurprisingly, inadequate information and the haste-driving production occasionally led woodblock artists to make factual errors in their work.
By World War II, disinformation was more steadily and strategically applied on the home front in an attempt to boost morale as the war dragged on. Even Kamishibai about how to guard against enemy disinformation included intentional lies aimed at bolstering national confidence in the war effort.
The Kamishibai counterintelligence warriors from 1942 warns against the intelligence activities, propaganda, and conspiracies spread by the enemy and encourages the audience to remain vigilant. The play explains how spreading a rumor without fact-checking may result in assisting spies. At the same time, the play spreads its own misinformation. It states Japan remains well supplied and that people should not be fooled by rumors about running out of soap and toilet paper.
The depiction of children in Nishikiye propaganda was incredibly limited. They appeared mainly in scenes of the imperial family that included the crown prince. In the 20th century, however, as authoritarian rule gained dominance, no citizens were off-limits as either subjects or targets of propaganda. Much of the propaganda Kamishibai either depicted children or made for them, such as air-raid shelter instructions and collecting materials to support the war efforts. A primary goal, however, was to have Kamishibai mentally prepare children as future soldiers ready to sacrifice their lives for the emperor.
In the Kamishibai soldier play from 1944, a group of children play at being soldiers in the Japanese Imperial Army, each taking on a different role. Those with weapons are soldiers, others are nurses, and one even does logistics, thus preparing children to assume these roles in the future. The world is awash with propaganda today, and the tradition of incorporating it into Japanese popular arts continues in the mediums of manga and anime. Regardless of your interests, the global success of these mediums means there's a good chance you've seen some of it, whether as Gundam robots, Pokemon, or Demon Slayers. But are they propaganda? For the most part, no. Just like Nishikiye and Kamishibai, in general, these art forms are popular culture and not propaganda. But like those historical formats, anime and manga can be used as propaganda by both official and grassroots creators.
Today, propaganda is still used in mass media to influence audiences. It takes critical thinking to judge whether the media contains ulterior motives and underlying messages. Can you tell the difference between what is purely entertainment and what is made as propaganda? We invite visitors to explore themes of propaganda and interact with this topic yourself. A new online portal on this topic can be found at fannintheflames.hoover.org.
Thank you for joining us on the virtual gallery tour.
We look forward to seeing you at Hoover Tower.